I'm Condi Rice. I'm the director of the Hoover Institution, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you here for a meeting that will recall the 50-year history of the Shadow Open Market Committee. Now, I must admit that as a specialist in international politics and having done some intelligence work, Shadow Open Market Committee sounded like a little bit of a contradiction in terms. Nonetheless, I do know the importance of this institution. And in fact, we here at the Hoover Institution have a long connection with the SOMC. Milton Friedman, whose ideas spawned the SOMC, was a strong presence here at Hoover for more than 30 years. Alan Meltzer, a very good friend of John Taylor's, and of course, one of the pioneers. Michael Bordo, who was Friedman's student and has been here for well over a decade, and of course, members of the SOMC, Charles Plusser and Charles Kalmiris and Andrew Levin and Mickey Levy, all of whom were Hoover associated at one point. I know that this is a time when going back to look at the importance of this committee and all that it has done is of extreme importance. John Taylor, who has spearheaded monetary policy here at Hoover for several decades and also across the country, holds from time to time these wonderful workshops, these wonderful conferences that allow us to look back on the great institutions that have really caused the tremendous prosperity and, in fact, stability that we have enjoyed for so many years. But I have to tell you that there can't be a more important time than to both recall that history and to try to build on it as we try to find some verities, some anchors in an international system and international economy that is at best chaotic and in some ways dangerous these days. We are facing so many extraordinary circumstances. Now, my good friend Steve Kotkin, the historian, always says that everything is unprecedented if you don't know history. So I'm certain that there are precedents for what we're facing. But to the most part, they're not particularly good precedents. We are facing, I think, what I have called the return of the four horsemen of the apocalypse: populism, nativism, isolationism, and protectionism. And perhaps we've come to expect, we've come to take for granted the extraordinary international economy, one that was not supposed to be zero sum, an international system that has largely been peaceful, and an international system that has largely been led by democracies, and we've come to take it for granted. And that is definitely something that today we cannot take for granted. We have, of course, before us the China experiment, and I call it exactly that because it was something of an experiment to try to integrate fully into the international economy. A country who, under Deng Xiaoping, came out of its isolation, but really only intended to come out of its isolation on the economic side, and kept its principles of a state-owned and Marxist economy at the center. For a while, we said of China, it's not possible to have economic liberalization and political control. And Xi Jinping came to power and said, thank you very much, I'll take political control. And we have seen the effects on the international economy of a China that is of a very different social and political system. I'm reminded that when George Shultz and Ronald Reagan started the G7, the seven largest economies in the world were all democracies. That is not the case today, and it is an unknown as to how this will play out for the international system. We have another sad experiment, which is that because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russia has essentially been ripped out of the international economy. With the valence of sanctions and restrictions, Russia is a more isolated economy now than it has been since well before Gorbachev. We forget that Russia once chose autarky, as they called it, not integration. At no point in its history was the Soviet GDP that was more than 1% of it accounted for in international trade. But in that 30 plus years after, Russia was integrating, and now Russia sits on the sidelines. I would ask you, as we think about this international economy and the backdrop for what you do and what the SOMC does, how long has it been since you've heard a politician in the United States say the words free trade? It has become for both parties a kind of third rail, replaced instead by discussions of tariffs, by tariff man or those around him, by sanctions, by onshoring, friendshoring, national shoring, and a pullback from the sense of an international economy that was supposed to operate first and foremost on efficiencies. I don't have to tell you that the other words that no politician ever speaks are about deficits and what we do about the fact that we continue to borrow money that we do not have. When I was provost of Stanford, I used to say to the departments and the deans, I'm not the federal government, I can't print money. Well, the federal government, of course, takes that to an extreme, and we see no slowing down there. And so the economic landscape is an extraordinarily more complex and more difficult landscape than 50 years or so ago when the SOMC was founded. It is also a landscape that is lacking in understanding of what it was intended to do and how well it has functioned over those years. Some work that we've done here at Hoover shows that some 35% of Americans do not trust markets. I'm not sure they even know what they mean by markets. I know that many of my students wouldn't be particularly clear on the concept. And so there's an educational function, both of policymakers and of the next generation. And there needs to be a renewal of a commitment to those principles, to those anchors that have led to so much prosperity over so many years. And so in that context, I'm delighted that John has gathered you all here together to look back on this 50-year history, but also having looked back on that 50-year history, perhaps to look forward to what the SOMC will mean to an international economy that is definitely in need of principles and an anchor. Thank you very much and enjoy the conference.